Well, the objective of this demo then is steps and also lighting, because what we've got here in front of us is a bright yet overcast day. It might have just rained on this scene. This is the scene that we've got, and the alleyway, the steps leading up here to a building with an inner courtyard. And because it's a dull day, I'm trying to imagine a little bit of light on this scene. So it's Riva del Garda, on Lake Garda, and these lovely buildings. Let's try and build in some character into these buildings, warm colors as well, and introduce the sunshine. If you're on Pat Chat, I described my two alternatives to the lighting direction: the light coming from the left, throwing a shadow diagonally across that way, or the light coming from the right, throwing a shadow across that way, this in shade, that little triangle there catching light, maybe some light catching the top of the steps as well. That's the route I'm going to take. That's my favorite option on this. So imagining the light coming from the right. Let me try and unpick the scene for you. So pretty obviously we've got a left-hand side, right-hand side, the background building with what looks like a courtyard, like a raised courtyard in the distance there. That is, you come to with another set of steps beyond these gates here, these rather ornate gates. On the left-hand side, there are some planters on the wall, a lovely old lamp as well, a little bit of a tiny balconette there, the overhanging roof. The color, don't get too wound up by the colors, but there is a sort of warmish, my photograph coming out of the printer hasn't done it justice, but there's a little bit of a pink, light pink glow to that wall there. Almost like a light sagey green for this part of the wall on the left, the extreme left. Very warm color, like a terracotta, beautiful color on that wall facing us, and then slightly yellowish on that side. The olive green of the olive trees in the courtyard, grey stone walls, the steps coming down to us. I think there's been a little bit of the water is dripping down some of these steps, so we can see a little bit of a sort of stain of the steps, but we can just about see a little bit of a light hitting the tops of these steps just to give us some guidance. And they are sort of almost turning a little bit as well, not strictly parallel to each other. Right-hand side, two edges to that roof, similar overhang to the left-hand side and the distance as well. The overhang is quite pronounced on these buildings, and then right-hand side, we're imagining this is in deep shade. But this Bougainvillea, this climbing vine here on the right-hand side, perhaps a little bit of that is catching the light. And then we have to try and imagine that the shadow being cast by this building coming across the steps, perhaps sort of down to that area there, and then going up the left-hand side. During Pat Chat, we discussed putting in a figure or two. By all means, you can get a figure in there. I'm going to keep it nice and simple. I'm imagining a distant figure up at the top of the steps somewhere. Not sure left or right yet. But if that left-hand side is going to be in the dark, it'll be a light figure on a dark background. If that's going to be light there, that wall there, the angle of it, I think that could be quite light. Imagine bright sunlight coming in there, maybe a darkish figure in front of that, trying to emphasize those contrasts. All right, Riva del Garda then. Materials. Let me describe materials to you. My normal watercolor paper, Saunders Waterford, 300 grams cold press, 15 inches by 11 inches. The colors I've got from, I use Jackman's art materials, watercolor paints. They're handmade watercolor paints, but my colors are exactly the same as per previous paintings. Neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red, cadmium orange, and yellow. There's a lavender there. 3 mixing wells. My water is over to the right, and a sponge. Brushes, I'll be using a soft squirrel mop brush. This is a size 14, and then maybe a medium-sized synthetic brush as I go into some of the shadows and being a little bit more careful with my painting, and then a smaller brush for details. All right, so mainly 3 brushes, I think. Okay, well, let's get started then. Let me just check if there's any questions coming in, those listening live on Patreon. Betty, the left is a grayish, the left grayish building is rounded, isn't it? Yes, I think it is. It sort of curves around. If we look at I think the rooftop gives it away. Maybe a sort of point there, and then a side. Perhaps it just angles in just a little bit more here, but yes, it has got a sort of a feeling of a curve to it. I'm going to start drawing, make an outline drawing with a 3B pencil, getting in the main shapes, trying to get the perspective right and the composition right before I start painting. So, top of the left-hand building, first of all, something like that, and then the background building beyond the courtyard, getting the angle of those rooftops right. There's this lovely chimney as well, this ornate chimney here. Can imagine that's catching light. I think I'm going to go quite blue with the sky, trying to another contrast, the cool against the warm, right? Blue and the warm color. But that chimney, try and keep that fairly light white of the paper. And then on the right hand side, the edge of the roof is almost vertical. When in fact there's 2 edges to the roof, one higher than the other. This is the lower one. Like that. Top one joins the wall there, and then this one comes down to around about there. Back to the background building and the left-hand side, the corner, the inside corner. There's this olive tree in the courtyard, and the gates. Either side of the gates, there's some lovely pillars. And a gate here, but I don't want to go into too much detail with that gate. That would be just a little bit too much detail there in the background. Continuing above the steps, there is this wall that I said, let's imagine that's really catching the light. As it's going up the street. Top of the steps is, let me just adjust my screen a little bit. Top of the steps is almost horizontal. And we just about can't see the base of the entrance to the courtyard. Now, left-hand building, the right-hand edge of the left-hand building comes down and it goes just a little bit below the top step to the sort of second or third step. And then it sort of comes down to this left-hand corner. I mentioned there was this sort of pinkish color here, a lighter color, and then we go a little bit more like that sort of grayish greenish color. There are some narrow windows on that light section. Just think about perspective a little bit. And the planter with those pinkish flowers there. And there's another one there. Balcony there. On the right-hand side, it's quite confusing here that there are some steps that I guess might be an entrance to a house. Maybe there's a doorway here, little steps, gateway. Let's try and simplify that right-hand side, but still feature the Bougainvillea on that right-hand side. So I'm drawing the outline now, the Bougainvillea, thinking about these pink flowers or bracts that are coming out, these racemes of these long arms of foliage, and these colourful pink bracts that are coming out. Just think about their main shape. Starting from the top and looking at the shapes of the purple flowers, not worrying too much about the green leaves at this stage, but just those purple flowers. So purple flowers, purple, purple. Trying to get the feeling of that, the flow of those flowers coming down. Not worrying too much about the green foliage at this stage. And the bottom of the right-hand building sort of comes down like that. Left-hand side. almost a 45-degree angle there. Now the steps, which is what this is all about, steps. Starting from the top, I'm going to try and draw some fairly horizontal lines, but getting wider as we come down to the bottom of the steps with the perspective. I think they're quite wide steps. I think they're quite deep, these steps. I sense they are. But let's just strengthen up that top one there, and then another one. So I put a slight angle on it, and now I'm going slightly the other way. All right. Then on the left-hand side, get in the step pattern, the actual edge of those steps. Likewise on the right, but get it right on the left-hand. Get it right on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, there's going to be dark shadow here, so we're not going to see so much the detail of the right-hand edge of those steps. Back to the background building, there's this window with a balcony there. Shadows, there's going to be a 45-degree angle shadow there. This will be in the shade. That will be lit up, but there could be a little bit of a shadow coming from that balcony. All right, figure. If I put the figure there, it would be a little bit congested. I think from a balance point of view, let's put a couple of figures on this side. And I'm looking at the photo. There are a couple of mopeds here, a couple of scooters. So we can imagine a figure would be, the head would be around about there. Of course, at the top of the steps, we might not see their feet. Couple of figures. Right, just check everything now. I'm not actually drawing in all of the edges of the shadows. I'll leave that to the painting stage. Just sort of try and imagine the shape and the edge of those shadows coming across. But in my mind, I want to try and keep this light here, light there, light there, light there. Right. Are there any questions for those listening live? All right, let's start painting then. I'm not going to do the sky first of all. I'm going to get in the base color of the buildings and be careful to paint around those areas. I'm going to keep quite light, like the wall here. Well, I might actually go in very, very light on the top of this doorway, but get a little bit darker as I come down, but keep that quite light. and keep that white. With my soft squirrel brush, try and introduce a very light, I'm using with alizarin crimson here, a very light sort of pinkish color. First of all, in this left-hand building. I'm not bothering with that lamp. There we are. And now a little bit of that grayish green color, quite light. I'm going to use a bit of cobalt green here, but you could use a little bit of viridian green if you got that, but very weak. Maybe a little bit of burnt sienna in that. I'm not including that shutter either that's in the top left corner. That would be, there's a shutter here, the window here. Too much detail in that top left corner. Let's go a little bit more intense as we come down to the bottom, a little bit stronger in that color. The staircase, the stairway, the steps start off quite light at the top, a little bit of burnt sienna. Just dragging the brush across, and if there's a few little bits of the paper showing through, doesn't matter. Continue over to the right hand side. And then the background building. Which has that lovely terracotta. It's almost like a little bit of a sort of orangey terracotta color. Quite deep, really warm. So I've got light red here, cadmium orange. Paint around the flowers. And then the right hand side, go with the yellow ochre. And for the olive tree in the courtyard, a little bit of viridian green, a little bit of that cobalt green. Paint carefully around the pillars that are catching the light. There. Now continue with the wall here. The value of this wall is very similar to the building behind, but we've got to try and imagine that's going to be a little bit in the shade there. That's going to be light. That's going to be in the shade. I'm just going to cover up the paper first of all with a sort of grayish stony color. Cerulean blue, or I could use a cobalt blue. A little bit of string blue, tiny bit of burnt sienna. Creates quite a nice grey. And paint in that pillar there. Tiny bit of light hitting the right hand side of that. And then the right hand pillar, perhaps there's just a few little, the cap to the pillar, just catching a bit of shadow below those caps. Right hand side, I'll just go with a little bit of yellow ochre on that wall. The edge of the roof, go over that as well. And just a little bit of the wall showing in the bottom right corner. Okay. Now, my thinking about this right-hand side, trying to get the light hitting that Bougainvillea, I'm going to paint the leaves in first, leave the pink flowers last, and then get in some darks within the plant, just to get that feeling of the form of that plant. Right, some leaves. A mid-green. It's going to be a mid-green, this one. Now I've got a spring green here, or if I don't have a green, do a sort of 50-50 mix of a blue, like a cobalt blue, and a yellow, just to give you that sort of mid-green. I've got a medium synthetic round brush, and now just add in where the leaves are going to be. We'll do a little bit of painting around some of this green with the darks. So I'm basically leaving white where the fluorescence is going to be, those purple flowers. There are a few little bits of the Bougainvillea coming out into that white space as well. Right, just let this dry a little bit. While this is still quite damp in there, I'll just add a little bit of darkness to the bottom side of this olive tree, just a little bit of soft shadow, just to give it that kind of form. Same colors I used before. Maybe add a bit of ultramarine blue, a little bit of burnt sienna. It's too much. A little bit of ultramarine blue. And then from the bottom of the tree, add in that shadow, try to get a bit of a soft edge between the dark and the light in that tree. So I'm just using my fingertip a bit just to lift it off and merge it a bit. While I'm at it, I'm just adding in a few little lines for that wall. Okay, next. I want to make sure this is dry first. I'm going to do the shadow of this building, and then I'll add in the sky. Let me just check and see if there's any questions. Oh, no questions. So hopefully you're all following me okay on this. All right, shadow. I'm going to use, again, a medium synthetic brush and get in the, let's just mix the shadow up here. Get in this shadow. Now I want this far side to be quite cool, not too warm, but I want to try and push it back. So cool shadows, I think, will work. Ultramarine blue, bit of alizarin crimson, bit of burnt sienna, but mainly that blue. And starting on the left-hand side, try and get that edge. So good edge there, good edge there. Come around that planter. And then down to top of the wall. Shadow across the front of this building. Like that. And then shadow on the right hand side, bearing in mind the colour. The colour of that wall was yellow ochre. So let's go in with a little bit of that yellow ochre. And then down. Down that wall to the top of the olive tree. Like that. And then I need that diagonal shadow. Start with the balcony shadow. This is where you need to be quite careful with the painting, because all of these lines need to be parallel with each other. Again, down to the top of that olive tree. Create a bit of an edge to the tree. Into the courtyard. Define the right-hand side of that pillar. Top of the steps there. There we are. And we'll add in windows in a minute at a later time. Can use the finger just a little bit just to soften up some of those edges. Right, sky. I'll go back to my squirrel mop. Now I'm washing off what I had on there before, which was the yellow ochre. And I want a nice, bright, sunny day, blue sky, which I think I'm going to go for cobalt blue. Mainly, a little bit of cerulean. There's not a lot of sky. I don't need to pre-wet it, but I want to lay down a fairly even wash, I think, and carefully go up to the edge of the rooftops. Perhaps the rooftops might be just catching a little bit of light. A little bit of light, and I need to paint around that chimney as well. down the right hand side of the chimney to the top of the building. Perhaps a little bit of light on the top edge of the roof. There. There's a little bit of glare, but that glare will hopefully disappear once it dries. And once you've laid it down, don't mess with it. My paint's granulated a little bit. It's not as flat as I'd like it to be, but if I start messing about with that, it's all going to go horribly wrong. So just leave it. But hopefully we're just starting to get the feeling of that light now coming into the scene. Next, I think next will be the right hand side. Let's get in that dark shadow. So starting with these two rooftops coming down, dark around the Bougainvillea, defining the edge of that shrub, that climbing plant, and then gradually come down that right hand side and come across the steps with a sort of staggered edge to that shadow, down into that bottom left corner, and then up that left hand side. Just imagining we can play around with the shapes of these shadows. I think it might be quite nice having an angular shadow like that. Might look quite nice as a sort of replication of that angle there. Now I need to make sure this is not too wet, otherwise there might be a little bit of bleeding in there. I'm going to leave that, I think I'll leave that a little bit light, that edge. Same brush, my squirrel mop, and really dark with these rooftops. I mean, that's going to be here and here are going to be two very dark areas of the scene. And for this dark color, I'm going to start off with that neutral tint and a little bit of burnt umber, perhaps a bit of ultramarine blue. So it's not too black, not too like a dark charcoal. Do want to inject a little bit of a color in there. So there's my two rooftops, the edges to those two roofs, and now the wall, a dark yellow ochre. You can get some quite nice sort of shapes with this brush just by using that flat edge there. I will go a little bit darker with the shadow within the leaves, but this is just really getting in that wall. And now the shadow going across the steps. A warmer shadow. Let's have a little bit of that cadmium red, a little bit of ultramarine blue, a little bit of burnt sienna. So starting from the top, going to be quite careful here, just following the lines I did for the tops of the steps. Keep changing the intensity of my shadow color. It's getting a little bit easier as I come down to these bottom ones. Just leave a little bit of a slither of light on the top of the step. Perhaps get a little bit cooler down to the bottom. And then the shadow goes up the right-hand side, but a softer edge to that side. So with the slight texture of my paper, using that brush, side of the brush quickly up, we get that little bit of a deckled edge to it. I'm going to define those steps a little bit more with a smaller brush later on, but I think so far that sort of looks okay. Could go a little bit softer on some of the edge of the shadows further away from the wall. You'd expect there to be just a little bit of a softness as I was trying to get there. But don't overwork it too much. Over here, what I've yet to do, darker leaves and of course the purple of the Bougainvillea. Let's get in now. Let's do the left-hand side, the overhang of the roof there. That's going to be dark as well. Smaller brush for this because it's a smaller area. Smaller synthetic brush. So dark, and then the shadow on the wall from the overhang, but not as that. The darkest will be the actual overhang of the roof. As I did on the right, a little bit of burnt umber, bit of neutral tint, burnt sienna as well. Tiny bit of light hitting the edge of the roof. Down to the end. And now I'll use some of this. Bit of a warm shadow underneath. Now, where will that shadow be? Let's imagine a shape a little bit like that. There we go. And a bit of a shadow underneath this. Balcony there. And I haven't painted it yet, but the shadow of this planter here. There we go. Next. Could go a little bit darker there. Just underneath that roof, go quite cool with that shadow. So it's dark, but darker still underneath that rooftop. Right. Next. Well, I think I will just let that dry just a little bit more, and then we'll go in with the dark green. So get this side done, then that side, then those two figures, then the details on those background buildings. Are there any questions at all? I think we're just beginning to get that feeling of light coming into the scene, that strong sunlight coming in from the right. Now, the dark green on this right-hand side, well, we're beginning to see here, even though this is sort of in light shade, you can see the intensity of the darks, and that really is making those light leaves sort of shine, pop out. And do that first, then we'll get in the pink bracts, the flowers of the Bougainvillea. Synthetic round brush, dark green, which will be, well, I could use that green with a bit of neutral tint, or Viridian green with a bit of burnt umber. That will give us quite a nice green as well. There we go. And it's almost in value terms, it's very similar to the overhang of that roof. Viridian green, burnt umber. And I think it will be, if the light's coming from the right, if this is the front of that house on the right-hand side, most of these dark leaves will be on this left-hand side. Go a lot darker in there. Burnt umber, Viridian green. Okay. Not too much detail. Don't want to make that too fussy on that right-hand side. For the flowers, now I don't have, that is such a bright pink color. The best I can do is use a little bit of my alizarin crimson and maybe a tiny little bit of a blue, but keep it fairly weak. Let's use a small synthetic brush and a cobalt blue perhaps. But if I go too thick with this, the color is going to be too dark. Where the flowers could be a little bit dark on the left-hand side because that's in the shade, a little bit lighter on the right-hand side. Perhaps if I leave just a few little specks of the paper showing through, that might give more of the impression of that light coming in from the right. So a little bit of that blue, and then Perhaps leave a little bit of the paper showing through. It could be light hitting some of the petals, could be the actual flower itself. There we go. Hopefully just a little bit of that light trying to come in for that right hand side, and trying to get also the feeling of these groups of flowers together. On that right hand side. All right. On the left-hand side, the building on the left-hand side, I've got the top door, and then some shutters. Halfway down, and then a lower window. There. There's the planters on the left-hand side. And bit of foliage for these plants. Start off with a light green and then go much darker. And this one is really dark, just there by the wall. this wall needs to be just defined a bit more. And then that wall pillar, there's a sort of retaining wall there. Let's imagine the gate is open. Two figures, not too dark. A little bit darker than that. Ultramarine blue, a little bit of burnt sienna. And then the right-hand figure, slightly different pose. Top window above the balcony. And then on the other side, got four rather ornate windows. There. Perhaps a little bit of darkness there. A little bit of shadow on the left-hand side of this chimney. And just to find these steps a little bit more. Now, I think I'll use a small rigger brush for this. I want to get some nice fine lines. Got to be quite careful. Just the sort of underside of the top edge of these steps, just to define them a little bit more. Something dark out of the palette, and maybe it needs to be a little bit darker. Not a continuous line, could be broken. Gives it a bit more character. character. A little bit thicker as we come to the foreground with perspective. Perhaps a bit darker as well. That bottom one. And some of these steps, they've got little vertical lines. Let's put in a few of those. Just a few. Especially on the lower ones, I think. There. Right, what else? Maybe on the right-hand side, there are these windows here. We can hardly see them. Windows are open, shutters are open. Perhaps I can define a little bit of that with something dark. So ultramarine blue, neutral tint. Okay, a little bit of balcony for the balconette here. And it's got a nice curve to this one. It's following the line of the balcony, of course. I think just a few lines there to help with the perspective a little bit. They aren't really there in the photo, but just to add something to that side. And on the background bin is drain pipes and things. as verticals. Maybe just define a few of the little tiles on the roof there, but I'm verging into adding a bit too much detail. That olive tree, does it need a bit more shadow at the base? Maybe it does. Just add in a bit of this dark olive green. Just a tiny bit more. There we go. Let's add some flesh color to those two figures. Perhaps one of them's got a darker jacket. Bit of a balcony. There. Right, I think I'm done. Well, I hope you like that. I'll catch up with you on the next video.